was 40306, and I still have that. These tags were made up from a workshop that we had not quite 2 years ago, and we used these as name tags for the teachers that attended our workshop, and it went over very well, and we've been using them ever since. And when I go to speak to the different schools, many of the teachers that attended the workshop asked to have these duplicated in order to show what we had to go through. But we are all tagged something like an animal.
Edwin Ezaki, share with you a part of our American history. Once again, thank you.
I think, will I have to hold this up here in order for you to hear me? Okay, we'll do that. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that, and I'd like to thank the West Shore Unitarian Church for the opportunity to share my story with you today, and I thank you all for stopping by to listen to it, and thank you, Ray, for giving me this opportunity. Before I get into my presentation, I wanted to direct something to Ray, something that we've had the opportunity to participate in. Are you aware of the Facing History group at all?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I've had the opportunity, along with a couple of my members of our Speakers Bureau, to participate with the Facing History group, and it sounds a lot like what you're talking about now. And I had the opportunity one session to sit in with a group of students from Collinwood and some school in Shaker Heights. I can't remember the name of it now, but they had a diversity group session, and I was one of the participants, along with the Holocaust survivor, Tuskegee Airmen, American Indian groups, and just something on the order of what you were talking about. So you might be interested. I'll talk to you about that when I'm done. Anyway, good morning. In order to get started, I think I would like to give you a little bit of family history for Ed Ezaki, the Ezaki family history, which I think in doing so, I'll pay tribute to my grandmother and grandfather, who I love and I miss dearly, and I owe so much to, that the reason I'm even standing here today in the situation that I am is I give thanks to them. Grandmother and grandfather were born in the tiny island of Japan many years ago, and I'm so grateful that over 100 years ago that my grandmother and grandfather had the vision to look across the Pacific Ocean, probably like many of your ancestors, and visualize a better world for their family. And by doing so, my grandmother and grandfather left their native Japan, set out to a foreign land where they couldn't speak the language, they really didn't understand the culture, and yet he felt that there was going to be a better life for him and my grandmother to raise a family. And they came here to America, to California, and even though they didn't speak the language, they raised a family of 6 children, of which my father was the oldest of those 6 children. And during that time, with some of the things that they had to put up with, is that they were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to become U.S. citizens until 1952, in which time that both grandmother and grandfather did become U.S. citizens. And there was a immigration law was passed in 1924, which did not allow any more Japanese and Chinese to come here to the United States. So they made it in time to start a family. My dad, as I said, was the oldest, and today I marvel at the fact that even though grandmother and grandfather were not allowed to own land or anything, they came here with a strong determination, strong back, and knowledge of the land. They were farmers. And all during the time that they were raising their family of 6 children, they had to work for someone else. They couldn't work for themselves to do anything. But as determined as they were, they did well. And up until the time that my dad, as I stated, who was the oldest, was old enough to become a landowner, they had to work for others. And I marvel at that today when I think about what struggles and what pains they went through in order to come to that point. Anyway, when Dad was able to buy property, my grandmother and grandfather and Dad, they purchased a little parcel of land in San Jose, California. And that's when I come into the picture. My mother and Dad were married in 1930. And that farm that they purchased, which was a 25-acre fruit and vegetable farm, which they made into a very lucrative business in the early 30s and the late 30s. And I was born in 1933. So I was, and actually I was literally born on that farm. That was the time of midwives were very, very popular. And I was actually born on that farm that I'll tell you about what happened after 1941, but I was born on that farm, so it was a very, very important part of my life. And again, I say I love the fact that my grandmother and grandfather had that vision and provided this opportunity for me. So I'm bringing you to 1941, December 7th, 1941. And I think everyone in here knows the day of infamy that will live in infamy. 1941, when the Empire of Japan launched an attack on our naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Up until that time, living on that farm in San Jose, California, I have nothing but pleasant memories. I recall going to school, English school during the day. My grandparents and my parents still wanted me to have the culture, the Japanese culture in me, so at night I attended Japanese school each night after regular English school. My only regret is that it didn't last too long. I didn't get to go to school, to Japanese school at night that long, because along came December 7th, 1941. From that day on, prior to that, I do not recall any type of prejudice. I don't recall encountering any type of racial prejudice whatsoever. I had a very pleasant, happy childhood memories from that point. December 7, 41, the attack came on Pearl Harbor, and that changed our lives as well as millions of other lives, but it changed our family life completely. I recall a lot of happiness, horseplay and things like that from my aunts and uncles and my parents prior to that. But it seems from then on that I noticed a drastic change in the attitude of the family. It seems as though all the adults would talk in whispers. The happiness and the laughter definitely left our household. One of the reasons is that within 3 days of December 7th, 1941, the FBI descended upon our farm, and the manner in which they descended upon our farm, and to identify my grandfather, who, as I stated, was not a U.S. citizen, he could not be. They identified grandfather, they searched the house, they ransacked the house, they never gave us any idea what they were looking for, and they wouldn't let grandfather, who had just come in from the farm, they started out early and he came in to have breakfast, wouldn't allow him to completely get dressed. They took him in what he had on. They wouldn't allow him to put shoes on. He wore slippers. They wouldn't allow him to have a jacket or anything, and the manner in which they took him just scared our family to death. when they didn't tell us what they were looking for. They didn't tell us where they were going to take grandfather, where they were going to take grandfather, why they were taking him or anything. They just took him. And my parents told me after that from that point on that they were afraid. I know Mom told me many times that she thought from that point on she would never see grandfather again, and that at any given point in time they thought that the rest of us were going to be gathered up and taken someplace and lined up and just shot like animals. And that fear stayed with them for a long time. And I think that as you hear me telling you this story, I know I can understand the fear that was with my parents, and for how long a period that must have stayed with them. As soon as they took grandfather, in that period of time that there was fear in our family, my dad, being the oldest, started to get word from our one of the sisters that lived in the city of San Francisco that they were forcibly removed from their home and business, and they were taken to the nearest racetrack. And what the government was doing was President Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066, which had given the military commander at that time was General John DeWitt, the authority to assemble and detain persons who they thought were, what's the word I'm looking for?
Undesirable aliens.
Something to that effect. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and but they were given he was given the authority to assemble and detain. It didn't state Japanese Americans. It didn't state Italian Americans or German Americans. It just stated they had the right to assemble and detain. But what happened is only those persons of Japanese ancestry, and only those of us that lived along the west coast of states of Oregon, Washington, and California, those were the only ones that were forced from our homes and businesses, taken to the nearest racetracks or fairgrounds until the 10 detention camps or concentration camps, which I call them, were built by the government in order to house us. And what they did is they built the 10 camps to house over 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry. And again, I state that we have copies of the orders that were posted all around, and but Italian Americans and German Americans were not incarcerated in mass. I hear now that there were maybe a couple hundred or a couple thousand of those that they felt were members of some subversive group or something. They were detained, but they were not interned in mass as Japanese Americans were. And again, I state only those of us that lived on the West Coast. When Dad heard that his sister was being held in a racetrack, and he heard that the further you got away from the West Coast line itself, you had a chance that maybe they would not force us into these racetracks and fairgrounds and then put us into these camps that were later built. So what Dad did, and I recall this vividly, I was 8 and a half at the time, I recall my uncle and my dad loading up some of the fruit trucks that we used in our business, and I still remember them waterproofing a big piece of canvas, hoping to make it waterproof, and they brushed some sort of compound onto these big canvases, and they put it over the truck that was loaded with all the furniture and everything that we could put on there. I also recall, because I rode in the back part of the truck when we left, that the waterproofing did not work. The water came through. Anyway, we fled inland, and I still recall, I guess this was before the time of your Holiday Inns and Motel 6s and everything. The motels at that time were just little cottages, maybe about a dozen little cottages. And I still recall that I stayed in one of those cottages for at least had to be about 2 or 3 months. And the reason I recall it so vividly is that Mom didn't allow me to go to school. I think she was worried about her precious little son, that he wouldn't get beat up or assaulted or something in school. But I knew I didn't have to go to school. And I think Mom and Dad worked at it was a grape vineyard right nearby, and they worked at a grape vineyard. And I learned how to swim in a little irrigation ditch about 4 foot wide and about 4 foot deep with a board across there. I recall that, but that's because I didn't have to go to school. Anyway, the government extended the boundary that they had first set up further inland, and they caught up to us. And so even though we thought that we had fled with some furniture on the truck and everything, we lost it all anyway. We had to leave it there. We were ordered to report to a train station. And I recall going to the train station with only that which we could carry. So everything that we'd fled with, we had lost. But that was the case for all 120,000 of us. We were forced to go to the train or bus with only that which we could carry. Can you imagine today, with looking over this group, it looks like a very affluent group. Can you imagine having to pick out only that which you could carry? If I was to order you today to report to the train station tomorrow morning, can you imagine the dilemma you would have in choosing what you would take with you? I know I would today with what I've accumulated in our house. My wife would probably have me carrying a bunch of pots and pans and some Hummelware and all that, and I couldn't take my golf clubs or something because I'd have to carry all her things. But I add humor to it because that's my attitude on life. But whenever my wife hears me speak and I get the group to laugh or something like that, she hollers at me because, you know, I have to impress upon you the pain and suffering that my parents and the 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry had to go through in 1942, 62 years ago, during this period of time. So please keep that in mind, so to make my wife happy, that there was a lot of pain and suffering, and I could tell you many, many stories of things that happened, and I hope I have the time and you have some questions about that, so I could relay and share with you some of those stories of what hardships and pains that people went through because of what happened to them. The train ride. I recall the train station. I recall the soldiers with their rifles with the bayonets attached. And I was sort of excited because it was going to be my first train ride. But when I think back of what had to be going through my parents' mind, you know, it wasn't such a pleasant thought. But one of the reasons that I recall it, because it was my first train ride, I recall my uncle hitting me in my head because on the farm, we didn't have flush toilets. We had an outhouse on the farm. I'm proud to say that it was a 2-seater outhouse. I don't recall ever 2 people using it, but I do know that I do recall that as a child I never liked to use it. You know, there was spider webs and everything, and I always had the fear that snakes were going to come out of there. So I went in, did my business, and I got out real quick. But the train had a flush toilet on it, and the reason my uncle hit me in my head is because when I went on there, I recall I opened a little window that didn't open too well, and I tried to flush the toilet and look out to see where the water was going. I thought it was going to go out onto the track, and when my uncle asked me what I was doing, he caught me in there. He said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, you know, he hit me in the head, but I do recall that. The rest of the train ride, and I'm sure again for my parents, as I stated, Mom thought that at any time they were going to stop and line us up and kill us all. But I recall that the train, every time we came near a town, and we had no idea where we were going. That's what you have to keep in mind. The blinds were always drawn whenever we came into town. I don't know if that's because they didn't want us to know where we were going or whether they wanted the townspeople not to see us, but I do recall that. We ended up in Gila Rivers, Arizona, which I have some maps down here of the 10 camps, the location of the 10 camps. But I spent a little over 3 years of my life behind barbed wire fence with guard towers being guarded by a company of U.S. soldiers. I recall them riding around the perimeter of the camp 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with a Jeep with a machine gun on the back. And the barracks, I was in Canal Camp number 1 in Gila Rivers, Arizona. There was 2 camps about 3 miles apart, both prison camps. And in our camp, there was 27 blocks. In order to give you an idea of what the size of a block is, it was about 8 barracks in a row. They were about 20 feet wide and about 100 foot long. And then there was 2 rows of those. And in the middle, they had a men's latrine, a woman's latrine, and like a laundry room, and then a mess hall at the very end of the block. And everything was in the middle of the desert. The barracks were partitioned off, and dependent upon the size of your family is how large or small a room that you received as a part of that barrack. Our room was about maybe half the size of a garage, and it only fit, I'm an only child, so there was only 3 of us, and there was just enough room to fit 3 Army cots. For those of you that are familiar with Army, the canvas Army cots that fold up, that was my bed along with some Army blankets for the first probably year of my life in there. Some of the families that had maybe 8 or 10 people in there, you know, with about 4 or 5 children, they had a little larger room, but it was all still one single room per family with 1 light bulb in each section of that barrack. If you can imagine, for those of you that have brothers and sisters that have to, along with your parents, you had to spend your life in 1 room with no closets or anything like that. It was just plain 1 bare room with 1 light bulb. If you can imagine spending that amount of time with having to live with your brother or sister, which sometimes you can't even get along with them when you have separate bedrooms, right? But the adults were very ingenious. They would set up, maybe they would hang a blanket or a sheet or something from the rafters in order to try to provide some sort of privacy, but it was not enough. I used to think often about someone that had a health problem or something, had the runs or something like that, because the size of this block was, I would say, probably a football field and a half. It encompassed all these barracks and the latrines and everything. And some of the barracks were far from the bathrooms, and they would have problems if they, you know, if they had to get to a bathroom fast, they had to leave their barrack space and run to the bathroom. Some of them had to go about 70, 80 yards in order to get to a bathroom. And I think about that sometimes now as an adult, you know, on the humor side, how much trouble that would be. Maybe that's why I have 3 bathrooms in my house today. One thing I have to stress in my presentations is something about the Japanese culture. I believe that what happened to the 120,000 of us happened without a lot of publicity and fanfare because of the Japanese culture itself. There's something about the Japanese culture. I have to say I am an exception of the Japanese culture, but the Japanese culture itself, which I am very proud of, the unwritten rule is you never bring shame upon your family name, for sure, and you try to bring honor to your family name always. But for some reason or another, before I go any further, I have to take a poll here. Before you heard of me coming to speak to you today about the internment of Japanese Americans, how many of you had heard and knew about what had happened to Japanese Americans during the Second World War? Wow, okay. I guess because of the little bit older faces. I usually speak to high schools and colleges, and most of them I only get about 10 or 15%. I'm glad that you did hear about it, but anyway, I lost my train of thought now. The culture itself, we don't speak about what happened. You just don't go out and talk about it. Can I get just a couple of things of where you heard it from? Anyone? Where did you hear about it? Yes, sir.
I lived in Salem, Oregon between 36 and 40.
Okay.
When we got back home, we heard about this Japanese farm family.
You were from the West Coast, that's why. Anybody from the Midwest here or thing? Young lady.
I have an uncle by marriage who was in an internment camp, so that's how I found about it. But you will not speak about it, so thank you.
Thank you. Back here.
When I heard about this, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and I was so furious with our government that I stopped pledging allegiance. Ever.
I have a story to tell about that. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Very little bit.
I can tell you that. One more. Yes, ma'am.
Books published for children. I'm a children's librarian, and over the last 30 years, there have been novels and factual materials published for children.
I ran across one at Lake Ridge Academy when I spoke there to 5th graders. War, Peace, and All That Jazz by Joy Hakim, I think it was. And there was a picture in there that I'll tell you about later on, about that sign in front of a grocery store that says, "I am an American." And I saw that in that book, so I was very happy with that. Thank you. But what I found, and as the young lady here mentioned, you don't speak about it. My parents never spoke about it too much. And not until I got interested in telling the story at the insistence of my children. I'm married to an Irish American, Irish German American, I have to add, native Clevelander, and I've known her since I've been here in Cleveland since 1945. And I never mentioned it to the group of youngsters that I grew up with, who I'm still in touch with, many of them now. And I never spoke, I didn't go to say anything about, guess what the government did for me? For 3 years I was held prisoner in a camp in Arizona. I never said anything like that. And it wasn't until you started hearing about some of the hearings for the Civil Liberties Act in 1988 that President Reagan signed, that people started hearing about it, and then some of my friends asked me about it, and then they found out that I was a part of it. But we don't seem to want to speak about it for whatever reasons. And I'm going to tell you also about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up of all volunteer Japanese Americans, and what they did over in Europe, and how they won't speak about it. I try to get them to speak about it. But it's in the Japanese culture that you bring honor to your name, but for some reason, you let like water going off a duck's back. You don't speak about what happened to us. And it's a shame. One of the reasons I feel that it's important for me to pass on a story about my experiences is that it should never happen again. And especially since 9/11, 2001, what happened there, it brought back a lot of memories to members of my Speakers Bureau. I'm the chairman of our Japanese American Citizens League Speakers Bureau, and I have about 7 or 8 speakers, and many of them were quite affected by what happened on 9/11. I watched it on television myself, and it hurt me. And then today, when I still hear about 600 people being held in Guantanamo Bay without representation, without being charged with anything like that, it bothers me. That's not the United States that I served in the Army during the Korean conflict for, to help and protect, and what those young men in the Second World War fought and died for. That's not what we did all that for. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject a little bit. Okay. Yes, I do feel it is related, but I wanted to give you a little bit more about my background and stories of what happened with what we lived through. But that's what's happened. The Japanese people, for some reason or another, will not talk about the horrible treatment that we received. And I could give you all kinds of stories of what people went through because of the war. And if you see some of the pictures up here, you'll see the items about Japs not wanted, the Hearst newspaper article saying that the Japs are going to be cleared out of California soon and things of that nature. But we came back, and they're there now, and we have many representatives in Congress today, and highways and libraries are named after those that have made a name for themselves. I'm very, very proud of the fact of what they did. Camp life itself. I am so grateful to the adults in that camp, including my parents and the young adults in that camp. If I have achieved anything in my life, if I've been successful in any way whatsoever, I owe it all to the parents and the young adults in that camp, because they made life as normal as possible under some very horrific conditions. Everything I recall, all of a sudden I'm with nothing but Japanese people. There are no Caucasians or anything there. I'm just nothing but Japanese families, and every single day I'm living with Japanese people. I attended school, and one of the things that I feel a little ironic is that I recall, I have a picture up here of one of the camps, and there's a flagpole there with the American flag flying there, and to show our loyalty, we still had an American flag flying in one of the 10 camps. I'm sure every camp had it. I recall attending school. Now, the quality of the teachers, I don't know how good or bad they were. I don't know how they could get that number of teachers into an area, that weren't already employed as teachers. So they must have just scraped them up someplace. But my wife is she's an English student, and whenever I don't speak correctly, which is quite often, she corrects me. So every time that she corrects me, I say, hey, don't forget, the government threw me in this camp, and I had 3 years of improper schooling, and that's the reason I don't speak properly. So I have an excuse from that fact. I do know, speaking to some of the other speakers and others that were interned, that there were some Japanese people that were teachers at the time, and then when they were interned, they helped out in whatever camp that they were in the schools that they went to. But I owe so much to the adults for setting up. They set up a sports program. I learned how to play basketball, football, and baseball while I was interned in the camp. And I have to even add that a girl, I'm a chauvinist, I am a male chauvinist, and a girl showed me how to play basketball. So but, she taught me how to shoot two hands, and then so in order to be more manly, and I started shooting one hand later on, but she taught me how to shoot two hands. But I'm very happy with the fact that they had these sports programs in these camps, because it helped me when I came out here. Quick run back on our story. My dad was allowed to come out of the camp in 1943, soon after we were interned, because there was a manpower shortage out here because of the war. He went up to Idaho to pick potatoes. He said it was very hard work, and he couldn't go into town because he couldn't go in to eat at the restaurant or get his hair cut at the barber shop because they didn't want any Japs there. Fortunately, my uncle, one of my uncles, came out here to Cleveland, got a hold of my dad and said that it was a very industrialized area and the opportunities were much greater out here, and Dad joined him out here in 1944. And I'm happy about that, because I'm proud of what I've accomplished so far, and I'll tell you about that later. But Dad was out here, and he became a machinist, tool and die machinist, from a farmer to a tool and die machinist. I should write a book about my story and the story of my father and my family and what they accomplished. He became a machinist out here. Mom and I joined him out here in 1945. prior to the end of the Second World War. They started letting us out of these camps because they found out that we were not a threat. The only place they would not allow us to go back is to the West Coast, because I think the people on the West Coast felt that they had gotten rid of us and they didn't want us back. But eventually they started going back, and I'm glad that they did. But the first families that went back to the West Coast, when they were eventually allowed to go back there, ran into more discrimination than when the war started, because they thought they had gotten rid of us over there. In line with how the government found out shortly after we were incarcerated that they made a mistake, we were put into these camps starting in about April and May of 1942. By January 1943, someone from the War Department came up with the idea of forming an all-volunteer Japanese-American group. And they sent out word to the 10 camps for volunteers to form this 442nd Regimental Combat Team, all-volunteer Japanese-American group that would have Caucasian officers. I'm proud to say that the call was answered by the young men that were in the camps. Can you imagine? Your freedom is taken away. You had not committed a crime. Your only crime was that you looked like the enemy. You were denied your constitutional rights, and you were forced from your homes and businesses, and you were put into these camps. And then the government comes up 6 months later and they ask you, would you like to volunteer and risk your life and limb, put on the same uniform of the people that are guarding you and your family in these camps, and go off and fight the war for the United States? Well, these young men did it. And I'm very, very proud and glad that they did answer the call. They did form the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They were joined by the 100th Battalion from Hawaii. Now here's Hawaii, where the war started, where the majority of people there are Japanese Americans. They were not incarcerated. They were not interned whatsoever. They would have shut down the entire islands if they had, so they didn't do anything to the Japanese Americans that were there. But they, with the 100th Battalion, they came and they joined the 442nd. They went over to Europe, and they distinguished themselves to prove their loyalty, that their loyalty was here with the United States of America, and became the most decorated unit in the history of the United States Army, which still stands today. And I'm very, very proud of that fact. They were my heroes when I was a youngster. There were about a dozen members of that 442nd Regimental Combat Team that ended up residing right here in the Cleveland area. Today, I think there's only 2 left. They've passed away. When I started with the Speakers Bureau, I had requests from many of the classes and organizations that I spoke at, can you get a member of the 442nd to speak? And I attempted to get members of the battalion to speak with me whenever I went out. I could not. They would not agree to come out and speak with me. They said it was something in their past. It was horrible. They did not want to relive it. They wouldn't speak about it. I'm going to give you one quick story about a personal experience of mine from that fact. My barber of 45 years, since I've been in Cleveland, he was my barber, Japanese American. I never knew that he was a member of the 442nd. Now you go to a barber shop, and I guess there's a couple movies out now, you know, when you go to a barber shop, you speak about everything. You solve all the world problems and the whole bit. Here's a barber shop that I went to for over 45 years, and he never mentioned to me that he was a member of the 442nd. Just about 20 years after I was going to him to get my hair cut, I happened to notice a license plate holder with "Go for Broke" on it, and that was their slogan, "Go for Broke." They felt they had nothing else to gain, but they had nothing to lose but to prove their loyalty to the United States, to show where their loyalties lay. And I asked him, I said, hey, this is the slogan for the 442nd. And he said, yeah. He says, I was with them. It took me 20 years to find out that he was a member of the 442nd. After he retired, I didn't find a barber, and he cut my dad's hair also, so he would come over to my house and have my dad come over there, and he'd still cut our hair for us. That's how close we were. He passed away about 3 years ago. I attended the memorial, and it was not until I attended the memorial that I found out that he was a prisoner of war during that time. He never spoke, and he said to tell anyone that he was a prisoner in a German concentration camp during the Second World War. I was so amazed at that I talked to his wife, who I still stay in contact with, and I told her how amazed I was, and she told me that he would not speak about it. And he was one of the individuals that I asked to, because I was that close to him, to have him come and speak with me. And he turned me down, saying that it was part of his past that he did not want to relive again. So he wouldn't talk about it. But that's just one of the things. And there are others that I talked to another individual who I wanted to come. We celebrate our Day of Remembrance on February 19th, every February 19th. In fact, it's going to become they're passing legislation on it now. So you'll hear more about it. It's going to be a day of remembrance, not only for Japanese Americans, but for many others, but February will be. And we have a observance every year in the Japanese community, which I MC the event. I spoke to another member of one of the two surviving members that are living in the Cleveland area to speak at last year's. And he turned me down, telling me he does not speak about it, that he would bring his daughter to the Day of Remembrance, but he just would not speak about it. I'm hoping to get him to come to a Veterans Day celebration this coming November, and the teacher told me he doesn't have to say a word. We just want to honor him that he's a member of the 442nd and served in World War II. So I'm going to work on that. But I do feel very, very proud of the fact of what they did. I was a member of the committee that raised funds for a memorial that we have in Washington, D.C. It's a Japanese American National Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's the only ethnic memorial in Washington, D.C. And I'm proud that I was a member of the committee to help raise $10 million for that. It was completed last year. I hope that when you go to Washington, D.C., that you stop in and see it. It's a little triangular section between the railroad station and the state capitol. I can't remember the street names, but it's a little triangular section there. It depicts the 10 camps. It has the names of the 10 camps there, and from my understanding, they scooped up some dirt from each one of the camps, and they have it all there at this memorial. But the two important parts of this memorial is the significance of the focal point of it is two cranes that are entangled in barbed wire, depicting what had happened to us, and the names of all the young men who gave their lives during the Second World War are at this memorial. So if you do get to Washington, D.C., I hope you can stop by and see that. Before I continue, because I don't want to keep talking, I enjoy and I appreciate any questions that may be going through your mind. And when I do get questions, it opens up some of my memory bank. As you can see, I speak with no notes. So, question in the back, young lady.
Was the sports equipment and school equipment provided by your guards? And can you tell us about the quality of the food? Was it appropriate for the Japanese people, or did they, what was it?
Thank you for those questions. Did everyone hear the questions? I'll hit the food thing first. I found out later that we were served the same food as the Army was served. So those of you that have served in the service or heard about it, I think that answers that question. And the Japanese people, the older ones especially, had problems sort of adjusting to what we were getting, like Spam and things like that. they weren't accustomed to those things, so their regular diet was absolutely demolished, so they had a problem. And a lot of them, because of the determination and of Japanese people, they started growing things that they wanted for themselves, you know. In the middle of the desert or wherever it was, you know, they're very phenomenal people, to be honest with you. So they did that. School thing, I don't know what the quality of the things were and everything. I recall personally that I sang the lead in a school play one time. It was Chattanooga Choo Choo. I still remember the song. I sang Chattanooga Choo Choo, but I really don't know the quality and just what textbooks or anything like that. I don't recall anything like that. I do recall, I think I had a crush on one of the Caucasian teachers, but that's from childhood. In the back, sir.
Were any of the attorneys able to preserve their properties in one fashion or another?
Thank you for asking that question. Our family, we were fortunate. We had a couple of Filipino families working for us, and we had a house in the back for them. So they maintained it, and we were able to pay them up until the time we couldn't pay them anymore. But by the time that ran out, the hysteria and everything had ceased. So we maintained our property. But I could tell you so many horror stories of how people lost their properties. In fact, this grocery store with the sign that I am an American, he had the time. I knew the family personally, because the family ended up in our camp, in our block, got robbed, really. They gave the store away because the people knew they had them over a barrel. I can tell you a story about a very, very good friend of mine who passed away years ago, who told me how he was treated. He had just purchased a new car, just prior to the war. And this happened, the executive order came down, so he attempted to sell it. He only had a couple days, and a Caucasian guy came up to him, and they agreed upon a price for the car, which was still far below the actual value of the car. And he asked that the only thing he had to do is he wanted to take his family down to the train the next day, and the gentleman agreed to it. And the next day, when he took his family down to the train, the guy told him he didn't have the money that they had agreed upon, and because he knew he had him over a barrel. I did give this gentleman a laugh, though. He was a beautiful person. Everybody in this room would have loved this person. I gave him a laugh. I told him, Bill, had that been me, and the guy did that to me, I would have flattened the tires, broken the windshield, punched out the radiator and said, here, you know, be my guest. And he got a laugh out of it, but I'm sure at the time, you know, he had to be devastated, and he was that type of individual that it hurt me for him to tell me that story of how he was taken advantage of. But there's just so many stories that I could tell you that have been told to me, but to show that billions, the Japanese people that were forced from their homes in the West Coast lost billions of dollars. Billions. So later I'll tell you that we got something out of the Civil Liberties Act, but it was peanuts compared to the losses that incurred by the people. Yes, sir.
How do you feel, sir, about being in the United States, having lived through this atrocity? How do you feel towards the government of the United States, which allowed it, and the people who took advantage of you?
Well,
and the millions of others.
Yes, when someone's taken advantage of, that bothers me. You know, I don't like the fact that someone, I don't care who it is. I'll tell you a story a little later about some of the people that were killed in these camps because they went on the other side of the barbed wire. But I really don't have any animosity. I served this country. It's the only country I know. It's the only country I love, and I'd live and die for it, and I'd serve again for it. But when I hear about people that were taken advantage of, and think, you know, there's a couple stories I can relate to you that people that were killed that went on the other side of the barbed wire fence when we first got into these camps. Now, first of all, we didn't know where we were. We had no idea where they had taken us. We're unarmed. When I hear a story about a gentleman that developed an interest in flint rocks and things that he was finding in the desert, and he happened to go across on the other side of the barbed wire, and a soldier shoots and kills him. I don't care if it's a Japanese American or a Hungarian American or what, Italian American or anything. I don't feel that's right. Like I said, we had no idea where we were. We were unarmed. I have looked different like this all my life. Had this gentleman gone and escaped from one of these camps, went to the nearest town, he's going to be identifiable so easily. You know, there's just no way you can do anything. In my lifetime, you know, and I'm almost 71 now, I've only seen one individual to change the way they look, and that's Michael Jackson. And none of us has that kind of money to be able to change our looks like that. But you know, there were about a dozen incidents of people that went on the other side. One to chase a ball that had gone on the other side of the fence. There's no reason for that individual to be shot and killed, especially in our situation. So.
And you said you were born in the United States. Were you considered a citizen?
I am a citizen.
I mean, I know you are now, but at
My-
this time of the internment, did they recognize you as a citizen?
Yes, we're still citizens. Like I said, I recall pledging allegiance to the flag every day in school while we were in camp. My parents were also born here. The only ones in our family who were not citizens were my grandmother and grandfather, who became citizens after 1952 when they were allowed to. Yes, Chris?
What type of medical care was there, particularly for acute things, emergency surgery, that kind of stuff?
Okay, I'm going to use that to relate a story of one of the individuals that went through our experience. I really can't tell you how great the medical coverage was in our. We had a hospital. We had a camp hospital to show you what they used. My dad, at first, before he left, worked in the pharmacy of our camp hospital, and he was a farmer. He had no idea. Everything he had to go through was a book that they gave him. But so I don't know what the care and everything was on that. But you've given me the opportunity to relate a story, a personal story that I know of an individual who still today, in relation to what you just said, has some bitter feelings against what happened to us. And the reason is that at the time the war started, his parents were elderly, and the mother had just had a stroke when they were given the order to leave their home. And he pleaded with them, you know, to be able to leave her in the hospital to get the proper care. But they wouldn't listen to him, and they made her leave and go into one of these camps. And he felt that they did not get proper medical care in the camp for his mother. He ended up going into the military, and he joined the 442nd. While they were in camp, they lost their property. In answer to your question in the back, they lost their property, so they had nowhere to go back to. His parents both passed away in camp while he was overseas fighting for this country. So when he came back, he settled, and he's still right here in Cleveland now because he had no place to go back to. The family had lost everything in California. So he's living here now because of that fact. So that's just one of the thousands and thousands of horror stories that I can relate to you that happened to them because of what happened with the war. In the back.
Do the physical locations of these internment camps, do they still exist to this day in any way, shape, or form?
Thank you for asking that. They exist, but no, they're not inhabited. I give credit to the department who set up this when the war first started, and they selected these sites because they selected the most isolated, desolate areas that you can imagine here in the United States. Of the 10 sites, not one of them is inhabited today. So they really picked some horrible sites. There's Manzanar, California, I believe, has been designated under President Clinton's term to be a historical site, and I think they're going to build, in fact, they may have already, built a little showroom of some sort, and they have designated a historical site, so it will remain there and probably has some of the artifacts and things left over from the war. Young lady.
When you were in the camp, like, what is going to be happening to people where you treat them? I'm not necessarily treated well, but how do you treat them?
In the camp itself?
Yes.
Thank you. You know what, I mentioned earlier how beholden I am to the adults and how they try to make things as normal as possible. You know, what happened here is that the guards that guarded us, we had nothing to do with them. They guarded to make sure that we stayed in there. And again, I have to give credit to the adults, and what they did was, as I stated, there were 27 blocks in our camp. All of a sudden, the adults formed, it was like a city within a city. You know, we made our own city. Each block was a city of a state, I guess you would say. Each block had elected a block manager, and there must have been maybe one head honcho over the entire camp. And then whenever you had problems in a block or something, they would bring it up, and then the block manager would take it up and they would settle whatever problems they had there. So we were like a little city managing ourselves, and whenever they had problems, they had individuals that spoke up for the either the block or for the entire camp. But they did a terrific job on it. So we were self-sustaining. I think there was a question back here.
Oh, I was just saying, Manzanar visited there.
Oh.
A barracks there and a flagpole and a little memorial thing and a visitor center.
Very good, thank you. Yes, sir.
This might not have been so relevant to you as an 8-year-old, but when you were in the camps, did the adults have, did they like know what was going on in the world? Like, did they have access to news? And did you listen to the radio and all that?
I believe later on we were allowed to have radios and things, you know, because I feel that the government found out shortly after we were incarcerated that they had made a mistake, that our loyalties were with the United States. So they had radios. I have a picture up here of a soldier, you know, someone who joined and visiting their parents in the camp. Can you imagine coming in there with full uniform and everything, and you have to visit your camp, your parents who are being held prisoner by the government that you're fighting for? But they did it, and I'm proud of the fact that they did. Yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned about the number of people that went ahead and served while their families were in, I know my uncle is the same age as you and also served in the Korean conflict. I suppose you probably don't know an exact number about how many people who did survive through those internment camps that went later on either then or later to serve their country. I think it's a credit to all of you.
Thank you. I'm sure that there were many, because you know, the majority of us, you know, there were a certain percentage of us that probably were born in Japan and they understood about Japan, but the greater majority of us, the United States is the only country that we really knew. We have heritage, but they were the only country we knew, and I'm sure that they all served proudly, and I'm proud of the fact of what they did, and I know that I'd go back now. I know in the, when was it, when I got out after the Korean thing, that's when the problem came up with the Khrushchev and the missiles in Cuba. And I was 100% behind Kennedy if he was going to go to war with Russia over the fact that they were going to establish missiles in Cuba that would be aimed at the United States. I was behind him 100% on that. And I'm glad he made Khrushchev pound the desk.
Have to stop him.
Okay.
Do we wish to continue?
Oh, you want me to tell you about this story about, okay, This picture has personal significance to me, and because the children of the owner of this grocery store in Oakland, California, ended up in the same relocation camp that we were in. In fact, they ended up in the same block that we were in Gila Rivers, Arizona, in Block 20. And my mother became very good friends with one of the daughters of the owner of this home, of this grocery store. And they had a long-term relationship, and even after we left the camp, this family went back to California, and we came out here to the Cleveland area, and they still corresponded. And to this day, today in 2004, I am still corresponding with one of the sisters of the owner, the daughters of the owner of this store. And she sent me a clipping, the original clipping from the newspaper that she still has to this day, of this same picture that was in the newspaper in California in the 40s. So it's very special to me, and I like to tell the people about it, how we spent time with them, and how most of the family has passed away now. The parents that owned it have passed away. But it's very significant to me. And when I see it in textbooks, and I know that this was at the Smithsonian Institute with our World War II display, I'm proud of the fact that I knew the owners of this grocery store. Picture of one of the 10 concentration camps that were built to house 120,000 of us Japanese Americans. And the significance that I like to point out is that even though we were denied our constitutional rights, we had the American flag flying over this camp, and I'm sure every camp. In fact, I recall my school days in the camp that I spent 3 years at Gila Rivers, Arizona, and I remember we used to start each class with the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States, and here we were being held prisoner even though we had not committed any crime against the government. In fact, our only crime was that we looked like the enemy. Wearing a reasonable facsimile of a tag that we all had to wear when the war started. And the government issued us family ID numbers, and I still have my ID number. Family number was 40306, and I still have that. These tags were made up from a workshop that we had not quite 2 years ago, and we used these as name tags for the teachers that attended our workshop, and it went over very well, and we've been using them ever since. And when I go to speak to the different schools, many of the teachers that attended the workshop asked to have these duplicated in order to show what we had to go through. But we were all tagged something like an animal of some sort. One of my speakers is from Salem, Oregon. Born in Salem, Oregon. I'm the chairman of our speakers group, the Japanese American Citizens here in Cleveland. One of my speakers is born in Salem, Oregon. What year? This is something that organizations and people never heard of it, especially the young people. How did I ever make it through 3 summers there without air conditioning? Today, if I go into a restaurant, the air conditioner's broken, I walk out and I go to the one where the air conditioner's working, but
Remember when it started in the theaters, we have air conditioning.
Yeah, well, I don't know how I made it through without air conditioning for all that time, and I don't know how my parents did.
Was there any kind of cross ventilation or windows or something in the dorms?
A window in there, but you didn't want before when we first got there were cracks in the floor that scorpions and snakes and Gila monsters used to crawl up into our barracks. Later on, they gave us linoleum, and that sort of blocked off some of that, you know. But here we had invaded their land, you know. They had all these snakes and scorpions and lizards and things. And I used to catch them. I used to catch them all the time. I used to catch snakes and give it to the elders, and they would make belts and things out of it. And I believe in some cases they probably ate the snake meat, you know, but it's not my cup of tea. But the adults used to. But they used to make belts and things. It's amazing what they did. I still have things today that I'm going to donate to the museum we have in L.A. out of peach pits. They would make like turtles, and where the peach and the top part would be the peach thing would look like the top of the shell of the turtle and everything. They would whittle turtles out of it. I have it at home today. What they used to make. It's amazing what they did under the conditions.
Shortly after your family went to the camp, the government decided that you weren't a problem after all. Now, so you stayed there, you know, for 3 more years, and I understand you didn't want to go back to.
They wouldn't allow us back to the West Coast.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, you know, you said people were shot outside of the camp.
They went on the other side of the barbed wire.
Yeah, this is after they decided.
Probably within the first year or so. You know, there's still, you know, there was probably still some tension there, but because after that, you know, I recall going out and taking hikes up to the closest mountain and things like that. In fact, I remember one time I took a hike to a mountain that must have been maybe 5-6 miles away, and when we finally got to the bottom of it, before we climbed up, we sat down for a rest, and I put my hand on, and a little cactus stuck in there. They had to take me all the way back, you know, in order for someone to get that thing out of it. But no, we started going on the other side of the fence after a while, but it's when we first were interned, they wouldn't allow us past the fence, and these individuals were killed.
So did they keep you there longer than like the first year for your own protection?
No, they just weren't going to let us go back to our homes. So, but here, what they did is they started letting the adults go out because there was a manpower shortage, and those of us, you know, there were kids that were like college age, their education was interrupted. They allowed them to come out to the Midwest or someplace to complete their education. So some people were only in there maybe 7-8 months, then they came out and then they completed their education and then they stayed out here. But we weren't allowed to go back to the West Coast for, I feel, political and racial reasons. You know, they wouldn't let us go back there.
But you notice when they needed the labor, that started. Same way with
They were
the,
losing crops and things, and the young men were all in the service and everything, so they used them to harvest the crops and things like that. That's why my dad first went up to Idaho to pick potatoes, but then got a job out here to help on the war cause also, you know, the defense plants and everything that they had here. And I learned to be a machinist and ended up as a tool and die machinist.
It's pretty amazing. That's a skill. I mean, you have to really learn how to do stuff like that.
He had to start an entire new life. He came here with almost nothing and started an entire new life where your former life was just disrupted completely.
Now, when I hear camps, I think of World War II concentration camps. Were you guys ever like denied food or clothes or anything like that?
the first year?
No, they had mess all set up for us when they built it, and like I said, they served us the same food that the Army got. I think what I hear is like 27 cents a day was allotted for our meals. But as I stated, a lot of the older people, they had problems getting accustomed to what would I call American food?
Right, yeah, Greece. How about just Greece? Yeah.
Yeah, they were.
I had another question too. Because they were fearful and they put you in camps and stuff, were any of the adults ever interrogated?
They may have been. Like I said, I was a child at the time. I don't recall hearing any stories of anything like that. I feel that people that were like officers or some sort of groups that they felt might have been subversive or something, I'm sure that they were. In fact, they were probably that group like were taken a few days after December 7th, like my grandfather, and they were all checked out because they were born in Japan, so they felt that maybe some of their loyalties may still be with Japan, whereas we had no idea of anything else other than the United States.
Do you think did the United States ever find like what they were looking for, like a spy or somebody who was helping?
They never said, just like when they came to our farm and they searched through the entire farm, they didn't say what they were looking for. My mother told me that they would look through some of our albums, see whether or not, maybe there were some pictures of my grandfather with some leaders from Japan or something like that, but they never said anything, and I'm sure they couldn't prove anything because he had no ties, to leadership, but that's what they were looking for.
It's a real Gestapo feel.
Yes.
When very much the imagery you put across is quite similar to the Gestapo Jewish.
Yes, very similar to that.
Yeah.
Other than we weren't taken into the gas chambers and things like that, but the family numbers are similar to the tattoos.
You were wearing the tag that you had. Did you have to wear that every day?
Well, when we were being relocated, up until the time we got us to the camp, but that family number stuck with me. I have some furniture at home that has the number painted on it.
Did you ever read that book, Snow Falling on Cedars?
No, I heard about it.
It sounds like an accurate description of internment camps.
They couldn't get used to the change in their diet. They weren't allowed to get the things that they really depended on. And that's very popular. It's been rewritten, I don't know how many times. Many of the schools that I'm afraid there. I'm happy about that. I finally read it not too long ago.
Yes. The senior queen, did she tell you all about it?
Years, I'm sure they have.
They won't go in the
Enough policy in place that could allow it is.
It's like, it's not the same as what happened to you, but it's the same tendency. And
numbers aren't either, we had 120,000 people affected and our entire families were affected, whereas now they're just taking individuals, not their entire families. But in our case, they moved us out of our home, forced us from our homes and businesses, the entire family, so that if they didn't take the entire family, we could still maintain our property and our belongings and everything. But in our case, the whole family was taken, so.